This video is brought to you by Devout Decals, makers of reusable Catholic art for your home altar, your bedroom, and your home classroom.
It may be Advent. People may be thinking about Christmas and engaging in their sacrifices and penances that are characteristic of the season of Advent. But the implementation of the Synod on synodality continues apace. They're taking no breaks from implementing this diabolical synod, this inversion of the hierarchy, this restructuring of the Catholic Church into the synodal church. This continues apace. One wonders if they will even take Christmas itself off, the day, or the octave, let alone the season. We have stories now of some of the most conservative places in Europe having a hard time embracing synodality. Other forces there, think among the very conservative bishops, have this bizarre idea that the implementation of synodality in the church in their countries will make it so that they can resist the secularization of the Catholic Church, not realizing, of course, that synodality is itself a secularizing force. The worst catechized generations in the entire history of the Church being given a voice in the governance and doctrinal decision-making process of the Catholic Church can only lead to a disastrous outcome. They do not accept this for some reason, but they believe that it can somehow shore things up. But in all of this is an underlying tension between essentially little o orthodoxy in the church, meaning right belief and right practice, and right belief in the faith, and actually trying to be Catholic and keep the Catholic faith, and this season of change. Whenever we have these seasons of change in the church, and we have been in a constant season of change since the 1960s, the implementation of this goes very, very rocky. They know this too, and yet they want to proceed ahead because they believe that somehow it will keep the Catholic Church relevant in the modern world if we only embrace some more modern ideas. So we go to the National Catholic Reporter for this headline. Europe's divided church confronts challenge of Vatican Synod. In Poland, the bishops think that synodality can help insulate the church in that country from secularization, which is pretty funny given that the secularist forces in Poland are now in ascension, with even laity in Poland going to the polls and voting against the church's moral positions as they intersect with politics. They openly support now politicians who oppose the church, who do everything in their power to push the church to the margins of society. That is what's happened in Poland in the last few years, and there's no sign that that's going to let up anytime soon. This secularization of the culture is going to have a secularizing effect on the church because for whatever reason, for the last half century or longer, the Catholic Church has not been able to resist these influences in the church from the outside world. Just haven't been able to do it. And at the start of Vatican II, the Pope, John the 23rd, said we need to open the windows of the church to the world, let a breath of fresh air in. He called what he was doing an aggiornamento, opening the windows of the church so that a season of permanent change can begin in the church. And he saw it as a renewal. It wasn't a renewal. It did not bring the new springtime he promised. It brought winter to the church, not spring. This is what synodality promises to do as well. Quote, in the weeks following the conclusion of the Church's Synod on synodality, Europe's bishops have been pondering its practical implications, especially in more conservative countries where some reform postulates have faced resistance. Debates on the Synod have been less audible here than in the West, and while some bishops have strongly supported it, others have been quite indifferent, explained Marcin, last name I cannot pronounce, director of the Polish Church's Catholic Information Agency, KAI. We must see how churches like ours embrace the synodal process, but I think its gradual unfolding will offer a significant chance to us now that we find ourselves at a serious and potentially dangerous turning point. He has been one of the many mulling the likely impact of recommendations for, quote, spiritual renewal and structural reform contained in the Synod's lengthy final report. He told the National Catholic Reporter the synodal model could help the Polish Church face pressures from Western-style secularization, as the Church's authority is questioned and declining mass attendance and dwindling vocations in Poland. Yet implementing the Synod's calls for wider, quote, transparency, accountability, and evaluation would take time, KAI director warned. By contrast, across Europe and Belgium, home base of the European Union and an alliance, some proposed changes look set to happen more easily. Although clericalist attitudes survive here too among the clergy and laity, 3-year guidelines are already being drawn up to, quote, implement synodality at all levels, according to the Belgian bishop's spokesman. The synod hasn't ordered precise immediate changes, and many questions such as the diaconate of women will continue to be reflected on, Jesuit Father Tommy Schultz told NCR. But many parishes were active in preparations for the synod and are keen to follow through on its conclusions, especially when it comes to listening together to the Holy Spirit and changing the Church's methods of governance. In that lengthy quote. Belgium, by the way, is like at the heart of the apostasy of the faith in Europe. Their mass attendance is some of the very lowest in Europe. They're desperate to try to fix that problem, but they're not desperate to fix the problem the way it can be fixed, which is to undo what caused it in the first place. Instead, they are doubling down on it. After all, Francis and virtually all the cardinals related to the Synod of Synodality have said that synodality is the further implementation of Vatican II. To try to fix the apostasy in Europe by doubling down on what caused the apostasy in Europe is nonsense, and of course will only exacerbate the problem. But they don't see that. Now, all of this is reminiscent of what was said about synodality in the United States. It wasn't that long ago that American bishops were accused of dragging their feet, trying to ignore the restructuring program for the church as ordered by Francis and the synodalists of their new synodal church. Back in June of this year, Pastor Tommy Reese of the Jesuit Church published an article in the National Catholic Reporter describing the internal tensions in the church in America on synodality in this way. Headline: U.S. Bishops' Report on the Synod on Synodality enumerates tensions but finds hope. Tensions is accurate. Many bishops in America don't want to make waves by openly resisting Francis's errors, but they do resist by trying to ignore his orders. While his voices in the episcopate from the likes of Cardinals Supich, McElroy, and Tobin push for the program of Francis to be implemented, while also Francis's voices in the laity, coming from the likes of Massimo Fagioli and the crowd at news outlets like America Magazine, Where Peter Is, and the National Catholic Reporter, exert lay pressure on the bishops to fall in line behind Francis. This does create tensions in the American episcopate, to be sure. Combine this with Francis openly remaking the U.S. Bishops' Conference with many appointments this year and next year of more bishops who were, according to Cardinal Supich, are going to be chosen to be more open-minded to synodality, meaning more in line with Francis's programs. You get a situation where it was announced recently, in the last month or so, that the U.S. bishops have created a committee at the national level with the express purpose to fall in line behind Francis's so-called reform efforts. Undergirding this is the tension Pastor Tommy Reese of the Jesuit Church describes here. These issues will be the same in the United States as they will among the more conservative factions in Poland in the church, because the faith is right now being pulled in two directions. One towards ignoring its own moral teachings, and the other towards standing firm in the faith regardless of the outside pressure. Here's Pastor Tommy Reese describing this tension in America, and this absolutely applies to Poland. Quote, a report from the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops on Diocesan Discussions about the Synod on Synodality released May 28th made clear how many issues are causing tensions in the American Catholic Church. Disagreements exist over liturgy, the role of women, clericalism, the McCarrick problem, church teaching, and cultural and racial differences. But despite these tensions, the report sees reason for hope. The report, officially the National Synthesis of the People of God in the United States of America for the interim stage of the 2021 to 2024 Synod, summarizes the discussions that took place during Lent in dioceses in response to the October 2023 session of the Synod. That session had been preceded by a worldwide consultative process, and the report is meant to help Catholics reflect on the results of the first session and provide new input for the next session in October 2024. The report acknowledges that the synodal process, quote, unearthed tensions within our communion, although no one should be surprised by these tensions. Some reflected political and cultural divisions in American society. Other tensions were over, quote, adaptability and innovation in how the church evangelizes, welcomes, and reaches out to people, says the synthesis. These tensions appear both within the laity and the clergy because of different theologies and political preferences. Pulling quotes from regional reports, the synthesis states, some, quote, were challenged by the church's indecisiveness, by lack of reverence, and the perception that the church is, quote, changing the traditional methods and accepting current, quote, things against our church rules. Quote, but others complained that, quote, some afraid of change and tired of doing new things, they are content with doing things the way it has always been done before. In their view, the church has, quote, become complacent, even ossified. Arguments over liturgical preferences in the Latin Mass, for example, point to, quote, broader debates about tradition, modernity, and the best ways to nurture the faith across the diverse spectrum of Catholic belief and practice. There was tensions about a welcoming spirit and the need to articulate church teaching. Quote, some are very worried about how the church responds to the James Martin crowd and other marginalized people. Others want to stand firm in the church's teaching and not shy away from the truth. It was expressed by many participants that, quote, leadership in the church needs to be clear about our truth. Confusion is leading to frustration and division among the faithful. Numerous reports from listening sessions, according to the synthesis, cited instances of communication, both from the hierarchy and from secular and Catholic media, which reflect, perpetuate division within the universal church and send conflicting messages of what it means to be Catholic, end quote. Yes, a church document actually used the phrase "our truth" to describe Catholicism, reducing the faith to relativism, and that is the perfect example of synodality, and encapsulates in 2 words, our truth, the division in the church. Traditionally minded Catholics, whether you are traditionalists or very conservative, so-called Novus Ordo Catholics, whatever you want to describe it as, for us there is no such thing as our truth. There is simply the truth of the faith as given to us by Jesus Christ and passed on by the church. And the forces of innovation on the other side are relativistic in nature, and synodality enthrones relativism. And there is your tension in the church. And this is the tension underlying this attempt to implement this diabolical synod on the church. We can assume Poland faces the same kinds of issues as well, because, again, in Poland, at this time, it's not nearly as bad as in America. Do not get me wrong on that. But they have these same cultural problems too. All you have to do is go look at some of the protests that have happened in that country and some of the statements made by their very progressive political leaders to see what's going on there. It will remind you of the United States and of Western Europe. Are you that surprised, though, to see that in more conservative countries you're having this kind of tension in the implementation of synodality? Do you expect Poland will fold the way the American bishops look like they're going to fold on this? Let me know in the comments, please. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. So does sharing this on social media. That helps too. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.